You just watched Nitpicking Font Spacing and Tracking with Grant Sussman. Up next, a deep dive of Joker. And later, Connor Cooks. Probably Colossal Shrimp and Angel Hair, I think. Exclusively on WZX49.
Welcome back, everyone. As I said in our Joker review that has no spoilers, this is really a film that deserves a deeper dive. And there are a lot of things that I wanted to talk about that I feel I can't without getting into the nitty-gritty of the film. And so, if you haven't seen Joker yet, go watch the review and figure out if you want to. And if you have seen it or don't want to, please stick around. We're gonna get really deep into the weeds on this one. First and foremost, a big thing that I praised about the Joker is Joaquin Phoenix's performance. And what I enjoy about it is the fact that it's not a malevolent and super genius supervillain. In certain stories, people actually believe that the Joker's superpower is being the smartest man in the world, and consequently, that he isn't able to adapt to society and appears to be mad. This goes back to an idea Foucault had where mental illness should be looked at as the inability to adapt to society's expectations or to conform, which is an interesting perspective that I don't particularly agree with, but it's the idea that what we call insane is really just people who aren't meeting our expectations. Consequently, and as a result of that, those people are marginalized. What I find really interesting, and again, as I said in the review, my background is in active shooter prevention and doing a lot of analysis about those kinds of incidents, you can typically notice a trend. And it's not a trend that's always true, but it's common more often than not. And that's an individual who is marginalized, who feels ostracized, who has a grievance, who for whatever reason is angry at someone or something and either fails to reach out or is unable to get access to some sort of resource to assist them in processing those feelings, either because of a stigma around looking for help, or because of availability and access to those things, or because the pathway to violence, as it's called, occurs so rapidly that there's really no point at which this person stops and thinks about whether or not their thoughts are rational. What do I mean by that? Mental health is very important in this conversation, but we need to stop pretending that people who do horrible things are inherently crazy. It's very rare that someone is like the Joker and just goes out and does something awful. And what this film explores in a way that I really appreciate is that he's not a character who is always violently insane. And that's very realistic. It's a character who is trying throughout the bulk of the movie to be a better person, who's trying to conform, who's trying to fit in. And every time he does, society beats him up and kicks him, or mocks him, or ignores him, or tells him to stop upsetting their child. At every turn for this character, it gets worse and worse. And the best visual metaphor for this is, of course, as he's continuously walking up these seemingly endless stairs for the first two acts of the film. It's a great metaphor for what the character's going through. He's taking his medication, he's trying to go out and pursue his dream, he's trying to live his own life, despite, as we find out later, massive psychological and what seems to be neurological trauma. I thought what this film did a really subtle job of doing is actually explore through sort of an everyman character, because again, it's not this supervillain Joker, how the average person can really come along this pathway to violence. You start with this grievance, this frustration, this marginalization, and all of these incidents that further that anger, that make you feel more at war with society. And then what typically is seen in research is what's called unfreezing or unanchoring, which is basically the idea that somebody like myself, no matter how angry I am, will be unlikely to do something criminal because I don't want to lose my job, or I don't want to upset my girlfriend and never see her again, or whatever it is that really tethers me to society's conventions, right? This Joker character is not just, beat up and made fun of and marginalized, but then loses his connection to his mother, loses his job, and has nothing left to lose. He's really just an everyman who easily should have been caught along that pathway to violence, who is a result of several failings in society's structure, the mental health care, et cetera, but also the result of the world around him. He's a product of that. And that is a lot more impactful than a guy who fell in acid and has damage on his forehead. Now, I think a bad movie uses all of that to make us empathize with Joaquin Phoenix's character. I think what this movie did is just show it as it is tell this story and not exposit to the audience by the end of it, hey, he's evil. And what I mean by that is sort of similar to what I said with The House That Jack Built. The movie never exposits good or evil in a black and white sense. The first murder in that movie is him killing Uma Thurman, who is scripted to be this obnoxious, abrasive, rude person. And so as the audience, because some of it's kind of comical, you're not watching an evil murderer, you're just watching a murder committed by your protagonist. By the end, as things get worse, you come to naturally despise that character and see the horror of that character. Joker is very much the same to me. The murders in the subway are self-defense. There's really not a lot of question about that. And as the film progresses, the actions get worse and worse and worse and more thought out. And as that character seems to be more coherent or to have more forethought in his actions, those actions are objectively bad or evil. But the film doesn't expressly tell you to look at it in that sense. Is that a failing of the movie? I don't really think so. And the reason for that is the Joker, while he is the character study of the movie, is really a foil for society. You're watching a Gotham City that's in crisis. You're watching a city that's in peril, but again, that's Gotham. It always is. The difference is what the movie tries to illustrate, in my opinion, is that people are looking for that icon, that hero or that thing that embodies their rage. Now, why is that important? Well, because 9 times out of 10, they get the hero. They get Batman. But in a different time, in a different place, those exact same people who maybe aren't inherently evil would be just as in love with the Joker. And by the end of this film, that's what you get. And so while you could interpret that as people love the Joker, I should love the Joker, he's my protagonist, I think the real moral of the story is just how easily swayed people can be to horrible things given the right circumstances. I also mentioned in the review that I thought a lot of these societal commentaries relate to politics. I'm not going to get into on this show political views, but I think most people could reasonably agree, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, that what we've seen in American politics over the last few years is an anger at the establishment and a willingness to take in a leader, allegorical to icon, I guess, in this conversation, who, despite a lack of qualifications, is espousing the type of anger and vitriol that the everyman can relate to. What this film does, I think, is create a really interesting environment where, much like we've seen in politics, someone who in any other circumstance would be in jail or would be in a mental institution or would not have a chance to become the Joker is elevated to a city hero. And that's a very resonant idea in a world where a lot of the political chaos and controversy we have now, whether it's in America or it's in Brexit over in the UK, a lot of these things are the result of people voting with their emotions. People using their votes like these people use the clown masks and go to the street and cause chaos. There's not really a plan, there's just anger and furor. And I think if that was the intention of this movie, I think it was a really well made allegory. It was very resonant with me. Finally, this is the big thing I really want to talk about. A sequence of conversations led to sort of a theory that I have. Joe had made a really interesting point that he felt Joaquin Phoenix's Joker kills the girl in the apartment on the same floor once he goes into her apartment and it's very clear all of a sudden they've never had a relationship and he goes back to his apartment. His idea was there's no way she wouldn't call the police and that you hear sirens but they pass by as if to illustrate they weren't called or they're not coming. I kind of disagree with that. I think there is a reality in which she wouldn't have called the police, but I also, more importantly, believe there's a reality in which if she had called the police in the slums of Gotham and said there was a weird guy from my floor who came into the apartment and then left on his own volition, I can't really see Gotham dropping everything to address that. But it got me thinking about something. When we talk about exposition, the one moment in this film that I thought was a little bit forced as a carrot for the audience is to illustrate that they don't have a relationship. In the very next scene where he's seeing the Fight Club flashbacks to her never really having been hanging out with him. And at first I thought it was kind of patronizing the audience, but it is an illustration that for many scenes in this movie, you only really see things from that unreliable narrator. Now, Patrick, you're saying, of course, we all got that. That's really obvious. However, if that could be the case, you have to begin to question everything. Now, I know one thing for sure. He does shoot Robert De Niro. How do we know that? Well, it's on TV. There are consequences from it. We can see it outside of just his perspective, right? There's another thing that we basically know, and that's that 3 men were murdered on the subway by somebody who looked like a clown. But I question if that was even the Joker at all. This is where things are going to get crazy. We can agree that it would be a little strange that the woman on his floor doesn't call the police when he stumbles into her apartment at night. But wouldn't we also call it strange that the Dorff character doesn't call the police after he witnesses Joker murdering a friend and coworker of his right in front of him, where he was terrified Joker would kill him as well? Now, maybe you'd say he let him live, and therefore he felt compelled to not rat that character out. Maybe, but also, why is it that within the hours it takes Joker to go from that apartment to the talk show, why is it that the makeup is not covered in blood still? Does he paint over that? It's possible. Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but that's okay. Let's say that maybe it happens, right? That would take a pretty cold-blooded killer, much like it would take a cold-blooded killer to murder their own mother in a hospital. But it is kind of weird that he murders his mother in a hospital by suffocating her, which is something that doctors can pretty plainly see when they find a body that has been so treated. And isn't it also strange that the heartbeat monitor stops as opposed to flatlining when she dies, and that no nurse ever comes in to check? Well, maybe that's just a coincidence. Maybe they're understaffed or something, right? Okay, fair enough. Well, we at least know that he shot the people on the train, right? You know, he pulls out the gun, and then he shoots the first person, he shoots the second person, he shoots the third guy, the guy gets off the train, he shoots him again, and then unloads another 3 rounds. But he fires 8 or 9 rounds from a 6-shooter. That was not an 8-shooter, that was a 6-shooter. Is it possible that your protagonist, who at this point in the film is really trying to be a good person, hears about these 3 murders and fantasizes that he's the one who did them to save a girl? Is it possible that these are all of the things, the baggage, the tethers he needs to cut so that he can actually go on the talk show and realize himself as somebody other than poor, weak Arthur Fleck? Not convinced? Fair enough. One last question. Why is it that this cold-blooded killer who could murder his mother, that could stab to death with scissors a coworker, that could shoot 3 men, that maybe even murdered the woman on his floor and would have to have then killed her daughter as well, why is it that that cold-blooded killer's fantasy on that talk show is killing himself? That's not the fantasy of a cold-blooded killer. It seems to be the fantasy of someone who doesn't have it in him to kill. So my theory is that perhaps all of these murders that you see from his perspective are just fantasies, things that enable him to get to a point where when he goes on that talk show, he's not Arthur Fleck anymore. Arthur Fleck has a mother. Arthur Fleck has enemies. The Joker has nothing, and therefore nothing to lose. That's my weird theory about this. And the big thing is, whether or not you agree with it, I think it's a credit to the ambiguity and lack of exposition in the script that you could theorize about these things back and forth, that you can think maybe he murdered the woman on his floor, that you can question whether he killed his mother. It's such an unreliable narrator, and the film is so ambiguous, you could really go one way or the other. But that depth to the storytelling, to me, is absolutely a credit to the patience and the film craft shown in this film. And the final thing I'll say to this point is how amazing I felt Joaquin Phoenix's laugh was implemented or even weaponized. Something that I noticed is when he's laughing on the train before the 3 men get shot, he's afraid and he's laughing. That's how he copes. He's sad in other scenes and he's laughing. That's how he copes. But in the beginning, when his boss is about to take his paycheck away for stealing the sign, he's angry. He doesn't laugh when he's angry. So it's not just that he laughs when he experiences emotions. He laughs when he experiences specific emotions. So I don't think it's due to brain trauma, like his card suggests. I think it's a coping mechanism developed from childhood. It's a way to protect himself. And what's really interesting to me is when he walks on that talk show, never happens again. He laughs, but it ain't the same thing. That is a character who is now devoid of fear. And the subtle implementation of that in this movie I thought was absolutely fantastic. If you don't agree with me, that's perfectly fine in regards to my theory, but I'm excited to rewatch the movie and see if maybe I missed some things, or if maybe this theory has some merit to it. It's really fun watching a movie with an unreliable narrator, and this is absolutely no exception. So it's been a lot of fun talking about it. It was a lot of fun seeing it, and I guess I'm finally done doing that.